Roger Williams was the founder of Rhode Island, the founder of Providence, and he's also the founder of the First Baptist Church in America. Williams was born in London around 1603. We're not sure exactly which because his birth records were burned up in the Great London Fire of 1666. He became a chaplain for one of the chief Puritan lords, Lord Masham. But because he was a Puritan and the church was cracking down and putting these people in jail, he fled from England, arrived at Boston in February of 1631. Roger Williams believed that the state had no role to play in religion. This is a radical idea. This is an absolutely radical idea of his time. Every country in Europe had a state church, and so did Massachusetts, and so did the Plymouth colony. They all had their own state-supported churches. The taxes of the people paid for the ministers and for the buildings, and you had to go to church or they'd come and get you and fine you. Williams said the state has no role whatsoever to play in religion. Eventually was put on trial there and convicted of sedition and heresy and was going to be shipped back to England where he probably would have died. So before they could execute that order, he fled through the winter of around February of 1636 and walked down from what is today Salem down to the headwaters of the Narragansett Bay, where he was then taken in by his friends, the Wampanoag Indians. And he spent the rest of the winter over with Massasoit, the great sachem of the Wampanoags. The following spring, when he found that he was still within the land grant territory of Plymouth and might be extradited to Massachusetts, he crossed over the Seekonk River into where we are now and was greeted by his friends, the Narragansetts. Now, he'd gotten to know all these people and he traded with them, and unlike almost everybody else, he learned their languages. He was followed down here by a number of his parishioners from the church in Salem where he'd been the pastor when he was convicted. And they organized a little town down here, and in their organization, in their first organizational meetings, they agreed that they would abide by the majority rule of the heads of households in civil matters only. So religion is not to be an issue for the government. And so they started a little town here. It's basically a farming, fishing village. That's about all it is. Very small group of people. It has a few dozen within a year or so, I suppose, but still a really small place. Providence, in fact, remains a fairly small place until the 18th century. Roger Williams founded the First Baptist Church in 1638, and what really was distinguishing about this, he after all, was an ordained minister, and for about a year before he began this Baptist church, he had been holding services in his house several times a week. We know that from the record. Today, we're in the meeting house of the First Baptist Church in America. This is the third building this church has had. In fact, the church is 140 years older than this particular building. Although this building we're in now itself was built about 240 years ago, a long time ago. But this is a remarkable building in itself. We're told this is the largest wooden building surviving from colonial America. There are bigger brick buildings and bigger stone buildings, but no bigger wooden building than this particular one. And there was no Baptist meeting house that looked like this one before this one was built. Every Baptist meeting house before this, whether in America or England, was a small place with no steeple, no bells, no frills, no nothing. But when this was built, it has a bell and a steeple, and it is quite a magnificent place. It is elegant and simple. It reflects the architecture of the 18th century, and it also reflects the architecture of the 17th century. When you look around, you see the English Palladian architecture with the fluted columns, the Palladian window. All these things are examples of that style of architecture, but that's all superimposed over the 17th century plain New England meeting house style. And that is characterized by no stained glass, by white walls, by the side doors. Now, the doors look funny now because there used to be an aisle that ran across here from side to side and a big center aisle, but that's how people came in those days. They wouldn't come in through the tower stairs. They would come in through these side doors in order that there would be no hint of an altar when they entered the the place. And you'll notice something else too. If you look around, you see there are no religious symbols in here. There are no crosses. That's because the Baptists came from the Puritan tradition, and the Puritans did not use crosses at all. They regarded crosses as another form of idolatry. Roger Williams would probably hate this building. First of all, the Baptists, most of them didn't have, at least here in New England, did not have buildings until the end of the 17th century. So this church was founded in 1638 and didn't have a building until 1700. And it was a tiny, tiny little building when it was built, very plain. It was not meant to show off any kind of vanity at all, whereas this one does. This building that you're in now is meant to be a show-off building. It really is. But Williams would not like it because it is big and elegant. It's got an organ in it, which most of the Puritans regarded as a kind of Catholic instrument and somehow one of the instruments of the devil somehow. So he probably wouldn't like it at all. He'd be very much pleased by the fact that this church to this day holds true to his concepts of separation of church and state, but he wouldn't like the building. I think that's pretty clear. Roger Williams, lived out his life here in Rhode Island. He died between January and March of 1683. And in all those years, he had played many roles, but he had been the president of the colony. He had gotten its first charter. He went back over to England with John Clark to save that charter, and he was on the town councils and so on and so on. He was, deeply involved in the political and economic affairs of Rhode Island from the day he got here until basically the day he died. Providence can be proud that it has one distinction. It's the first place in modern history where there was separation of church and state. First place where you separated religion from citizenship. And that's what Roger Williams did. Now we struggle on with that from that day to this. But it's interesting to me that the Bill of Rights in the First Amendment has two clauses relating to religion, and those two clauses embrace Roger Williams's concept. There would be no establishment and there'd be free exercise of religion. In some sense, that's what Providence and Rhode Island have contributed to the nation at large. So in a sense, what Roger Williams did here still echoes in larger context of the United States of America.